Oh, what's up, Geek fans? I was just doing a little reading to prepare for today's segment, which is on the depiction of Native Americans in film and television in the United States. I'm doing this in conjunction with my Native American history class at Eastern Connecticut State University, so stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun. Check it out. Hola, Geek fans. Welcome back. My name's Cheyenne Goodrich. I'm the host of Geeks of the Movies, and today on Geeks of the Movies, we are talking about historical depictions of Native people of the New World in film and television in the United States. My focus will be on the post-World War II period, as that's when television really became mainstream in American households. Now, depictions of Native Americans in the media have changed to reflect society's changing views regarding multiculturalism and the brutal history of the U.S. government's treatment of those people. In our short journey, the Indian will go from caricature to human being, and sadly, sometimes back to caricature again. Before we begin, a note about this production. A lot had to be left on the cutting room floor. What we have left is a narrative overview of changing depictions of Native Americans from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way until contemporary times. I will be focusing on Native Americans as people. Are they depicted as such? Are they depicted as multifaceted? Do they have multi-dimensional roles? Are they depicted as both hero and villain and in gray areas in between? Or are they caricatured? Are they one-sided, one-dimensional? Are they just the warrior or the scout? In addition, I will also sometimes touch upon the artistic merits of the films and TV shows at play, and I'll also sometimes touch upon the period authenticity of those same films and TV shows. Not every time, but sometime. In the cases of talking about the historicity of the depictions at play, I'll be drawing on my experiences as a Revolutionary War reenactor, as someone that has made historical clothing and that has worked with other people that had depicted Native Americans. I'll also be drawing on my extensive reading about these time periods, both from my Native American history class at Eastern Connecticut State University and my own personal reading in my free time. Enough intro, let's just dive right in. We're going to start with 1949's The Lone Ranger. This was a TV show starring Clayton Moore as the Lone Ranger and Jay Silverheel as Tonto, his loyal companion and sidekick. The Lone Ranger is the classic story of an outlaw hero that is taking care of justice. Justice is put into his own hands. He is a Western Batman, if you will. And Tonto is his Robin. And like Robin, Tonto is not really effective by himself. While, unlike other depictions of Native Americans in the early 1950s and 60s, Tonto is actually played by a Native American actor and has some positive attributes, such as he's loyal, he's courageous, he's very good at digging graves for some reason. He also has many not so positive attributes. He doesn't have the ability to work for himself. He doesn't have agency. He has to rely on the Lone Ranger to do anything. Me, Tonto, me need to understand. And this is also another problem with the Lone Ranger, is this caricatured dialect or accent that Native Americans have. And this is seen throughout the early period of Native American films and television, where they speak in this strange, stilted dialogue that just doesn't make any sense. So here with the Lone Ranger, there are some positives. Tonto is loyal and capable, but he's also subservient to a white man, to the Lone Ranger. He needs the help of a white man to guide him, to guide his life. And this is similar to views that were held throughout history and throughout our dealings with Native peoples, that the Native Americans need to assimilate to our culture, and we needed to guide him in that assimilation, whether it be through missionaries or through other mechanisms. So now, from the Lone Ranger, let's move on to another film that depicts Native Americans in not the best light. 1951's Distant Drums, directed by Rollo Walsh, starring Gary Cooper and Richard Webb, tells the story of the Second Seminole War, which takes place in the 1840s. Gary Cooper plays an army captain who is tasked with destroying a fort held by Spanish gunrunners. After he accomplishes this goal, though, he is driven into the Everglades by hostile Seminole Indians. There are many problems with this film. First, we get to the issue of whitewashing. All the major Native parts are not played by Native actors, but they're played by white people. Now, there aren't that many important Native parts here because Natives only play the role of savage, of the aggressor, of the people that want to destroy white civilization. In addition to this, the depiction of the Seminoles as fighters is very confused and contrary to actual historical accounts. The Seminole Indian Wars took place over many years, and the reason that they lasted so long was because of the prowess and the guerrilla tactics used by the Seminole warriors themselves. Here, though, the warriors, the Seminoles, are depicted as incompetent fighters, basically. They always rely on frontal assaults. They always rely on yelling and screaming and running towards the enemy. That's all they seem to be capable of until the very end of the movie, where they have some sort of other tactic that they rely on, which obviously fails as well. On the other hand, the whites are displayed as brilliant tacticians. At one point, the army captain manages to lure the entire Seminole band that's pursuing his group away with the help of one trooper.
I'll hold him off. Captain, you get out of here. I'll lead him away from you. Timid! Come on, you rat devils, follow me! Timid! Here we are, come and get us! Come on, you red bird dogs, slip over here!
Here, nothing positive is attributed to Indians. Not even their skills in tracking, their skills in guerrilla warfare, not even these things are depicted positively. Everything about the Seminoles is depicted as a negative or a caricature. They're mindless, they're fighters, that's it. I will say though, it's interesting that at one point Gary Cooper mentions that people can't distinguish between the good and the bad Indians, because he actually has or had a native wife. So apparently there are good Indians, but these that are depicted in the movie are not the good Indians. And as far as I can tell, none of the Indians in the movie are really depicted as good Indians. Even the ones that are on the white side as scouts, they're classically depicted as slow, speaking in a strange, nonsensical dialect. You, white man, me show you the path to this way. Me, and it's bizarre, it's odd, it's strange. But we're going to see more of this in other films of the 50s and 60s. And unfortunately, this is going to be a theme that's going to be running throughout this history of that we're going to be referring to. A theme of where natives are depicted as stupid, aggressive, incompetent, and generally not depicted as by themselves. They'll be depicted by white actors portraying Native Americans. And we can see this further and in a very egregious way in our next movie. Let us now turn to 1954's Apache, directed by Robert Aldrich, starring Burt Lancaster and Joan Peters. Apache tells the story of Masai, the last true Apache warrior, who after the surrender of Geronimo goes on his own one-man Rambo-esque guerrilla war against everyone. But worry not, eventually he settles down to grow crops and have a family, and everyone's happy and it's fantastic. Here's a few problems. Apache is the quintessential example of whitewashing. Burt Lancaster and Joan Peters play Apache Indians, blue-eyed European Americans. It is atrocious. They're bad spray-on tan, they're blue eyes, they're terrible fake Indian accents. Everything about this movie is insulting to Native American culture. Even the depiction of Masai, who is depicted as a great warrior and skillful at war, unlike a previous movie it talked about. Here, though, he's also depicted as rather detached, somewhat bizarrely detached. For example, at one point, he's traveling through a number of cities in the United States on his path to escape, and nothing really seems to affect him. It doesn't matter what he sees, he's always kind of even-keeled. He has no real emotional state to speak of. And this is a problem that we see a lot in these early films, where Native peoples are just odd, just weird. They don't react to things. They don't have proper emotions. They always speak in a monotone voice with that stupid accent that we've already talked about. And we see it here again. And also here we see some of the worst aspects of Native culture depicted. So for example, the previous chief of the Apaches is shown to be a drunkard. He's in bed with the white men. There's really aren't very many positive portrayals of the Native peoples. Even Masai, who is shown as a strong warrior, has to eventually yield to white man culture, to yield to being a farmer. And now he's all right. Now he's acceptable. So here, this is another theme that we will see throughout these films is, you know what? We can have Native peoples, we can have Indians, but they need to adopt white ways to be truly prosper, because they can't prosper without adopting white ways. Because they are a piece of the time gone by. So this is something that we're going to see time and time again, and we will see it in other movies from the 1950s, such as 1957's Tomahawk Trail, or 1956 The Searchers by John Ford, starring John Wayne, where we just see these bizarre depictions of Native American culture that aren't really accurate, and in the case of The Searchers, we see more blue-eyed Indians. Oh, the brutality. But let us now move on to the 1960s, where unfortunately for Native Americans, things don't get much better. Just like the 1950s, we see here a lot of whitewashing, a lot of caricature, a lot of one-dimensional characters, and a lot of just plain silliness and awkwardness that we have seen before. There were some very mild attempts to correct this, but they were mild, as you will see. We'll begin with the TV show F Troop, which ran from 1965 to 1967 and tells the story of a post-Civil War frontier fort called Fort Courage and all the shenanigans happening there and the people there in the environment. Of course, there's going to be Indians, including Chief Wild Eagle, played by Frank DeCova, another non-Indian actor playing an Indian role. But what I want to bring particular attention here is the 1965 episode Return of Bald Eagle. Bald Eagle is played by, I'm not making this up, you'll see the photos, Don Rickles. This is just obnoxious and offensive. How do you have Don Rickles playing an Indian? It's ridiculous. Even in a comedic show of this nature, and this shows you the disdain for how people view Native Americans. They didn't even bother trying to get someone even vaguely resembling a Native person. It's obnoxious. Next up is 1964's Cheyenne Autumn, directed by acclaimed Western director John Ford. This is based on the 1941 novel by Howard Fast and tells the story of the Cheyenne Exodus. Now, this is an interesting film because John Ford, who has previously in the past made a number of Westerns, such as The Searchers, which we briefly mentioned before, that weren't always very favorable to the Native peoples or showed them in the best light. Here, John Ford wanted to make a change. He wanted to actually do something positive in terms of depicting Native people. So in an interesting departure from prior films and many other prior films from the 50s and 60s, most of the extras are actually played by Indians. There's some speaking parts played by Indians. Now, they happen to be Navajo Indians, not Cheyenne. The film actually uses native language. Again, it's Navajo, not Cheyenne, so it's a little awkward. So this is a step in the right direction. But there's a problem here. Still, the majority of the speaking roles are played by non-natives. So even though the extras are actually Indians, and even though they're actually using Indian language, albeit the wrong one, they still can't have natives in a lead role, and it's annoying and it's unfortunate. Now, they do a better job of covering the ancestry of the people playing these roles. They tend to be of Southern Mediterranean origin. Some of them are Mexican and may actually have some native blood in them. They tend not to be blue-eyed. Oh my God. Thank you. But it's a small step, but it is a step in the right direction. And we're going to see as we move into the 1970s, finally some real progress being made in the depiction of Native peoples in the United States. As we now enter the 1970s, we finally see a movie where some attempt is made to depict Native culture realistically and accurately. 1970's A Man Called Horse, directed by Elliot Silverstein and starring Richard Harris, was lauded as a first look at real Indians. And in many respects, A Man Called Horse does treat Native culture more correctly and shows it more accurately. For example, the use of Native languages, the use of the natives actually showing their skills. These people are very good trackers, they're good hunters, they're not complete and utter fools. Unfortunately, there's still a lot wrong here. Now, A Man Called Horse is about the story of Richard Harris, who plays a big game hunter and ends up being captured by the Sioux. Inevitably, at first, he's beaten by the Sioux, he's treated as a slave, he's garbage, but through various heroic efforts on his part, he eventually becomes one with the Sioux. He becomes a Sioux. Now, this is problematic because, again, while the natives are treated better, the white man is still central, and the white man actually becomes a Sioux, and he becomes the leader, in fact, of this band of Sioux. So while we see some positive things, we actually see the hunting styles, the clothing, the teepees, all looking more realistic and accurate based on what we know about those things. We also see this great white mythos that we'll see again and again in coming movies, where the white man, it becomes one with the native, and he's the hero. He's the protagonist of the story, as opposed to the native people, who are more or less background characters. Another problem with this film, though, is while it claims right in the beginning to depict actual historical native practices that have been documented, many people have complained that many of the rituals are confused. Some are Sioux rituals, some are other tribes, Plain Indians tribal rituals. So it's a mixed bag of a movie. It takes a step forward, it's a connection to better movies to come, but it still has a lot of the baggage from the past. And now let us make a big leap all the way into the early 90s, and I'm doing this because not much really happens for the rest of the 70s or 80s in terms of moving forward of native depictions. Even with the Pan-Indian movement going on, we see more contemporary looks at Native American life as opposed to historical looks. But a big wave of historical dramas will be coming up in the early 90s that usher in a new era of depictions of Native Americans in film and television. The early 1990s are a time of great change in the depiction of Native peoples in American film and cinema. It's a time where finally historical accuracy is becoming a primary consideration, where finally a multifaceted view of natives is being considered. We're finally showing the horrors of what white men have done to the Indians and over time. It's really being shown on full display. Now, unfortunately, there's still a lot of the cliches that we've seen from the past. There's still the great white savior. You'll see this many times in a number of these films, where the white man is still central to the film, even if there's a lot of native actors in the film, even if the natives are depicted as real people that actually lived and existed at some time. We still see that they need to be buttressed by a white actor, by a star, to make them palatable for the general audience. We begin with 1991's Black Robe, directed by Bruce Bensford, starring Lothrain Batu, who plays a Jesuit priest seeking to convert Indian tribes that take him to a journey into the Canadian wilderness. This is an amazing film artistically. It shows you the journey of this one man, this Jesuit priest, into the heartland of the Canadian wilderness. This is the time of Champlain and the early colonies of New France. Here we actually see natives depicted as they actually were. A lot of work was done on making sure things were correct, making sure that the natives didn't live in teepees, because these were East Coast Indians, not the Plains Indians. They're living in longhouses. They're living in palisaded towns. They're showing actual weaponry and techniques and strategies used by these people. And they're using actual Algonquin and Iroquoian languages. This is spectacular on many levels. One problem with this film, though, again, is the central protagonist is white. The missionary is white, and he is central to the entire movie. But I really appreciate the ability to bring to life this time period from the past. When they go into a village that you see that has been fortified with palisades, as we actually know Native peoples did do, they had fortified villages. And when they go into these longhouses and we see the various tools they use, it is an impressive display. And kudos to the director for showing both the good and the bad. because not only are the Native people depicted as multifaceted, but they also are shown to be able to be capable of doing very brutal things. At one point, the father and a couple of his Indian companions are captured and they're tortured, which we knew that this is something that occurred in Native American culture, where torturing was just a de facto thing that you did to your prisoners. So there's good and bad shown here. It's not all one-sided. It's a very fascinating movie. It's a grim, it's a dark movie. This is a hard R. It's brutal, but I think it's very informative and takes a step forward in the depiction of Native peoples. Next up, we turn to 1992's Last of the Mohicans, directed by Michael Mann, adapted from the classic James Fenimore Cooper novel of the same name. This film stars Daniel Day-Lewis as Hawkeye, a frontiersman raised by an Indian father, played by famed Native American activist Russell Means. In addition, we get our first look at Wes Studi playing Magua, a deadly Indian warrior who has a vendetta against Colonel Monroe and his daughters. He wants to wipe them and their seed from the earth. Remember Wes Studi's name, by the way, because you'll see him in many films and TV shows to come. This film is definitely a move forward. They took a lot of careful research in making sure this film was accurate. They actually hired an historical consultant who went line by line through the script and said, hey, maybe you should make this change. Perhaps this would be more accurate. In this scene where Hawkeye is carrying his rifle, it'd be better if he carried it this way rather than that way. In this scene, when they're hunting, this would not be an accurate way to hunt. They would hunt this way. And the director, astonishingly, actually follows this advice. You should go online and find the script with the notes from this historical interpreter, because it's really impressive how much of what he suggested actually gets into the final film. In addition, I, as a Revolutionary War reenactor, this takes place in a similar time period. I like the attention to detail of the uniforms, of the various accoutrements that are used by the soldiers, and of colonial life in general. It's depicted like how it actually was. So in terms of historical accuracy and period authenticity, this movie is fantastic. Again, though, we still see the Great White Hope. Daniel Day-Lewis, who is a fantastic actor and does a fantastic job as Hawkeye in this role, is the star as opposed to the other Indian actors that are surrounding him. But I appreciate the fact that the Native people are shown positively and negatively in the case of Magua, and that the whole time period is giving a proper treatment. This is definitely a film that you want to see if you're interested in history or interested in the native depictions of historically that we've seen. Let us now turn to 1993's Oscar-winning Dance with Wolves, directed by and starring Kevin Costner. This tells the story of a Civil War veteran that goes out to the frontier because he wants to see it before it disappears. Eventually, he somehow gets involved with a Sioux tribe nearby, and then through various processes becomes, again, like we've heard and seen before, one with the Sioux. He actually becomes a tribal member. He marries into the tribe, though the person he marries also happens to be of European origin who had been captured years earlier. Now, this story is fantastic as a movie. It is a compelling story. You feel for the Sioux, you feel for Kevin Costner, you feel for the plight of the Native peoples. They're dealing with the incursions into their territory of white men, and they don't know what to do. And we see them discussing this over in council over and over again. How do we deal with these approaching newcomers? They don't understand the magnitude of what's about to come and fall upon them. In addition, we see some other amazing sights in this film. For example, there's an amazing scene of buffalo hunting that is just incredible to watch. This film Kevin Costner made really as a homage to Native American culture, and it does depict the Native people very well. Some might argue it depicts them too well. They're almost too much the noble savage or noble Indian here, but I'll excuse that because at the time it was really moving forward in a positive direction. This renaissance of Native American depictions in the early 90s really has continued to this day. We see this in such works as 2005's The New World, written and directed by Terrence Malick, which tells the classic story of Pocahontas' love story with Englishman John Smith. We also see this in such TV miniseries as Into the West. Both these programs depict natives in a more balanced way. Historical accuracy actually matters. They use native languages. They try to get the artifacts right. They try to actually differentiate between, are they using teepees, are they using longhouses, all these small kind of things. But I want to touch on a really fundamental shift, a breakthrough movie, in my opinion, that's going to be nearing the end of our narrative here. And that's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which came out in 2007. This was an HBO film. It starred Adam Beach as Charles Eastman, who was a Sioux Indian, adopted into white culture. He became a doctor and then went back to help his people. Also stars August Schellenberg as Sitting Bull and has Ada Quinn and Anna Paquin. This film breaks new ground because the Indians are the stars. There are white people involved, but of course there have to be white people involved. But here the natives take a central viewpoint, and we see their plight from their angle, and it's fascinating, it's intense, and it's engrossing. In addition, this film doesn't shy away from talking about maybe some less favorable aspects of Indian cultures. For example, we see in this scene as Sitting Bull is being confronted by an army captain about the Sioux history not always being as kind and wonderful as they might like to think it was.
No matter what your legends say, you didn't sprout from the plains like the spring grasses, and you didn't coalesce out of the ether. You came out of the Minnesota woodlands, armed to the teeth, and set upon your fellow man. You massacred the Kiowa, the Omaha, the Ponca, the Oto, and the Pawnee without mercy. And yet you claim the Black Hills as a private preserve bequeathed to you by the Great Spirit.
And who gave us the guns and powder to kill our enemies? And who traded weapons to the Chippewa and others who drove us from our home?
Chief Sitting Bull, the proposition that you were a peaceable people before the appearance of the white man is the most fanciful legend of all. You were killing each other for hundreds of moons before the first white stepped foot on this continent. You conquered those tribes, lusting for their game and their lands, just as we have now conquered you for no less noble a cause.
This is your story of my people.
This is the truth, not legend.
And of course, obviously, based on its name, this also depicts the historical massacre at Wounded Knee, and it showcases a number of other famed Indians. In addition to Sitting Bull, we also see people like Red Cloud. A lot of major occurrences in Native history are depicted in this film. Again, it is a movie, so the historical events may not always be in the correct order. They might have to shake things up to make things more exciting, but always, Native people are central to the narrative, they're central to the plot, and they are the stars. And this is something I would like to really see more of in the future. So what does the future hold for Native American depictions in film and television? Well, it's not over yet. It's not all positive when it comes to Native depictions in film and television, even to the modern day. We still have issues of whitewashing, such as Johnny Depp playing Tonto in the remake of The Lone Ranger. We have the issue of on the set of The Ridiculous Six, a movie by Adam Sandler, a number of Native people just walking off the set because they said this is insulting, we don't want this. A number of complaints were made against the movie Mel Gibson's Apocalypto for the depiction of Native peoples from South America, and that they were depicted in a way that was incorrect. So we still have issues of whitewashing, we still have issues of caricature, we still have issues of one-dimensionalness occurring in Native depictions. But things are moving forward. We see a change. People are now much more concerned about not just Native American depictions, but depictions of all cultures in general fairly and accurately on screen, whether they be African, Chinese, or anyone else. We don't want to have that system that we had before where it's just whites playing everyone and it's just white culture dominating. When we're showing depictions of other cultures, they need to be shown fairly and accurately, and hopefully that's what we'll see in the years to come for Native Americans.